And now we're going to do applique. I have my design loaded on my USB, so I'm going to access the USB by the universal USB icon. In my case, it's under the brother directory. And I'm going to select the apple. If I look at my menu, my top of my screen again, I'm using the 5x7. I have my machine set. I could possibly use the 4x4 hoop, but I'm just going to go ahead and set it. So now it's telling me it's 2.51 inches by 2.39. I could move it, size it, rotate it, and I could also save it on the screen if I want. But in this case, I'm just going to leave it on the USB stick and end my edit and embroider. So now we have different colored threads. We actually have 6 different colored threads. We have a red, a black, white, red again, and then there will be other ones on the next page. So it's telling me I have 1,557 stitches. It's going to take me 3 minutes. My first step is going to be an outline stitch, and that's going to show me where my red for the apple is going to go. So let's go over here and we're going to hoop this fabric. This is the red I have for my red apple. Now my stabilizer I'm using is just a clean and tear, so it's just a lightweight standard stabilizer. Just call it clean and tear. So, and now we're going to hoop our stabilizer, which is a clean and tear, and our background fabric. In this case, it's just a Kona cotton. So always have your hoop flat on the table and make sure you stand when you do that. I have both pieces together here. Make sure I can feel the bottom of the hoop through, so I have enough fabric over the sides. Put the top of your hoop on. Now you may have to loosen this. Loosen it as much as you need. So now we're going to, now I have 2 layers of fabric in, or the stabilizer in the fabric, so I'm going to push, 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 push. Just constantly keep going around until it's all the way in. Now I'm going to tighten it. And what I find is that most people over tighten their hoops, especially if you have a longer hoop. If you over tighten it, it'll make the longer hoop, because it's longer here, it'll start to bend it and then it'll get out of alignment. So you don't want your stabilizer and your fabric to be drum tight. This is not drum tight. So if you tend to over tighten it, I want you to go back a quarter of a turn. And then that should be the appropriate tension. So, like I said, number one problem is that most people over tighten their fabric, or they will not make sure that the corners are in, and then while they're stitching it pops out, and then you have to realign it. So now I'm ready to insert this into my machine. Okay, so let's go ahead and slip it into the bolts. The nice thing about this model is you know when it's in. Okay. So I've actually got red thread on threaded in my machine, because it does tell me that my first color is red. I'm going to go ahead and put my foot down. My button has gone green, and I'm going to go ahead and stitch. So I'm going to let it stitch a bit, and then I'll stop it so I can cut my top thread. I find that if you don't cut your top thread, it'll get caught in your embroidery, and it just makes it a mess. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead. Okay. It has now stitched out the outline of the applique. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my thread. I'm going to put my foot up. So here is my applique fabric I have, very pretty red. I need to make sure I put it over top where the apple has been stitched out, covering the entire apple up. So I have a good margin on all sides. Here's where you definitely want to use your tape. And you can tape all four corners. I typically only tape the two corners, bottom left and the top right. Probably because it's access to the machine. Seems to be easier for me. Again, never use pins. You will do serious damage to your machine if you stitch over top the pin when it's embroidering. Keep your fingers out of here because you can really hurt yourself doing that. Okay, I'm now ready to go. Let's put my foot down. Now I was going to do the embroidery stitch. So the first one is the underlay stitch. Okay. Now if I look at my screen over here, the image of the apple, it's a little hard to actually see it. You might see it better over here. So I did the underlay stitch first, which I have already talked about. It's the foundation of our embroidery stitches. If I hit the go button now, it will start doing the satin stitch. So I just finished the zigzag. Now I need to take the hoop off the machine. And now we're actually going to trim the fabric close to this stitching line. So I'm going to bring the hoop over flat on the table. Now when you're cutting applique fabric, always have your hoop on the table because you can easily pop it out. What I did, and this is why I like the curved scissors. So I hold my applique fabric up. This is my background. Now I'm going to cut close to the stitching. But if you use the curved scissors, you will not cut the background or the thread. So I'm just stitching, still cutting close to my stitching line without cutting the stitching line. Depending on which company you bought your design from, the excess fabric you have past the stitching line will vary. If it's an OESD project, you need to cut nice and close to the stitching line. If it's a Kimberbell, they give you a generous allowance of the margins. So make sure you turn your hoop as you're cutting. Try not to be a contortionist while cutting this, because what will end up happening is that it may pop out of the hoop, and it'll be with great difficulty to line it back up. Okay, so you can see I have a little bit of whiskering here, so put it back on the table, just trim it. This is where one of those little sticky rollers or some of your tape is good at just cleaning it all up. Okay. So now we're going to put our hoop back in our machine. So foot down. And now it should do some underlay stitches again. So it's just done what I would call a box zigzag. Again, that provides great underlay stitches to hold up the satin stitch. So it should do, we're going to go to the next one. And it wasn't necessary for me to cut the thread at that point. So it's now finished stitching the apple. I'm going to cut my thread. Now if I go over to my display, so it's telling me I'm going to stitch the little stem. Now it suggests a khaki. I'm just going to use a brown. So I will rethread my machine. Okay, foot down, green light, stitch the stem. I'm just going to stop it and trim my top thread. Here's a beautiful picture of the underlay stitches. Let's cut my threads. Now I have one last thread change, foot up. And this is for the little smile in the apple where the stem comes from. Okay, foot down. And we are completely done with our applique. So let's take our hoop out. Just trim some of the threads here. And we've stitched an apple. Beautiful satin stitch around the edge. Little stem, and kind of the little smile where the stem comes out. And that's how you do applique on an embroidery machine.